What do you do if you're 60 and you're starting with nothing and you want to retire by time you're 67? Stay with me. So people end up in these situations for a variety of reasons. People think if you get to 60 and you don't have anything saved for retirement, it's your own fault. You didn't save, you made mistakes, you gambled away your money. But I've seen situations like this firsthand, and I can tell you that's almost certainly not the case. I'm going to show you a scenario on my computer of a woman, and I actually did encounter this woman earlier in my career. She was age 60 and she had nothing saved for retirement. And how she ended up in that position is she experienced a separation from a partner earlier in her early 50s. And she also, unfortunately, had been diagnosed with a pretty serious illness in her early mid 50s that took her out of the workplace, incurred a lot of medical bills, and she had to dip into her retirement savings to basically save her life and sustain her while she was recovering from this very serious medical condition. So fortunately, she survived, and by age 60, she had actually a pretty good prognosis. Her family had a long history when this disease, of this particular disease, and she was one of the few people that actually survived. So it was a huge accomplishment. But she came out of that experience, fortunately, debt free. She had paid her medical bills and she had paid her expenses, but the cost of doing that was basically completely depleting all of her financial accounts. And unfortunately, her 401ks were depleted as well early. So she had survived, but she was basically starting at zero all over again. And she had to rebuild her financial savings and her retirement accounts in the next few years of work. Now, she had a goal of retiring at age 67. She really didn't want to work until age 70 because this whole experience had shown her how fleeting life could be. And she didn't know when this disease would come back or if this disease would come back. She had a good job where she earned a good sum, and we're going to talk about the importance of that. And she also had a good number of Social Security, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So she had some things working at her favor, even though she had just survived a very difficult experience and was starting over at age 60 with zero savings for retirement. So, what are the numbers to support her goal of retiring and leaving the workforce at age 67? Okay, so let me tell you a little bit more about this woman. She had had a very difficult decade of life in her 50s and losing a partner or losing a major relationship and also experiencing a life threatening medical condition that kept her out of work and basically spent through her savings in her 50s. But on the other side of that, she did have some really good luck. She worked in the field of technical writing. And when she was 60, she managed to land a job earning about $150,000 a year. And that's quite remarkable because she had been out of the workplace for some time. But during the time of serious illness, she had made a lot of contacts in her industry of technical writing, and she kept connected with many of her former colleagues and coworkers. And so when she was ready to go back to work, an opportunity just came available, and a former colleague that had worked with her in the past helped her land this opportunity, and it paid pretty well at $150,000. If you're starting at 60 with zero, you can only make up with it with money because you don't have time, and you have to have that money, and that money often comes from salaries. So if you are low salary or low money, it's really hard to hit the numbers that you have to hit in order to make this work. Okay, 3% inflation. Another thing that I wanted to point out was her Social Security was really nice. Prior to experiencing this dramatic change in circumstances in her 50s, she worked pretty well paid jobs. So she pretty much already had, or she was very close to having the full 35 years of earnings. And her full retirement age estimate for Social Security was actually over 3,200, but I backed off some for taxes and for Medicare, and we came up with 3,200. And the new company that she was working for offered a 6% match. Okay, so something else about this woman was that she was very grateful to be alive because she had defeated this disease that had killed many people in her family. And she understood her situation. She understood the assignment, and she was able to make whatever changes necessary in her life in order to make her retire at age 67. So she was able to, drive a beater of a car. She got a 7 or 8 year old cash car. She had sold her house, when she broke up with a partner, and used all that money for medical care and everything. So she found a really sweet rental deal, by renting an in-law unit at a little old lady's house in San Francisco. So she had ridiculously cheap rent. Her rent was like $2,000, which in San Francisco was unheard of. But she just found a in-law unit, an elderly woman who knew, like, and trusted her, and rented it to her at a bargain. So her expenses were really low. And we came up with the solution that she's earning $150,000 a year. She's going to hang on to this job as long as possible. And fortunately, I have a lot of clients who work in technology, and technology is rampant with ageism. There's a few pockets and segments that are not quite as ageist as the overall technology bubble. And typically, technical writers can work longer than other technologists. So she had that going for her. And the first deal was that she was going to keep this job as long as possible. She was going to do anything she could to hang on to this job for at least the next 7 years. The second deal that we had was that she was going to live on 2/3 of her salary. So she was going to live on 100,000. We were going to take the other 50,000 and we were going to invest that. Now, if we could invest more, great. But I understand that the cost of living in the Bay Area is quite high, and she's going to need that money to live. So we agreed we would invest 50,000. She would keep the other 100,000 to live. We also agreed that she would keep her lifestyle modest. I was like, living in that in-law unit may not feel like the greatest thing, but that's essentially what you're going to have to do to make this work, because there's nowhere else in San Francisco that you're going to find that square footage in that area for $2,000 a month. So you're going to hang on to that as long as possible. And if you need to change it, we need to talk about it. But that's an exceptional deal, and we can't swap out of it. We also can't put you in a new car because we really need that money for retirement. And she was like, yes, I understand. Let's work together. So this is the plan that we came up with, and the plan that is in motion. So she is going to contribute up to the match for her 401k at work, which is $9,000 or 6% of her salary. Her company is going to match her at $9,000. The rest of that money, because she's over 50 and she can invest up to 31,000 between a Roth and traditional 401k, she's going to put $22,000 in a Roth 401k at work, and she's going to put $19,000 into a brokerage account each and every year. And we're going to go forward in doing that for 7 years and see how things turn out. Okay. So her situation is a little bit unique in that she was able to land a really good paying job after a long period of unemployment. She has a very strong Social Security earnings, and she's willing to live well below her means in order to make this reality happen. When I see people who are 60 and don't have anything saved, they usually don't have any of those factors working with them. They're usually in that situation, sometimes because life happens, but sometimes just because they didn't want to make the sacrifices in order to put money away for retirement. But this is kind of an extraordinary set of circumstances, but it's something that most people could do. If you work really hard throughout a career, you could be at $150,000 into your 50s or 60s, depending on where you live. You could decide to live a rather modest lifestyle and not live above your means. And you could decide, I'm going to live on 2/3 of my salary and invest 1/3. But these are not easy decisions to make. Okay, so let's look through the numbers, or let's look through the next 7 years of her life. Okay, all right. So I used an 80/20 portfolio dating back to 2003. So basically the last 20 years of market performance. And I basically translated that forward to 2025 and beyond. Now, this return may be a bit optimistic for how 2025 started off, but who knows? We're just going to go with it. Okay, so let's start her off at age 60. We do the 9,000 in the traditional 401k. The company gives her a match, 22,000 in the Roth 401k and $19,000 in a brokerage account. We have a stellar year. It's a smashing success. The next year, she puts in another 9,000, 9,000, 22,000, and 19,000. She's already built up a pretty tidy sum by year 2. She's already basically crossing at this rate the $100,000 mark, which is very, very important. So she's going full throttle. She's feeling really good about it because, she got a really, really good return in year 1. So the wind is at her back. Also, if we would have seen 3 years of successive negative returns, this retirement portfolio would look completely different. But she started off the first few years with really, really strong returns. Boom. This is the equivalent of 2008, negative 30%. So this is where some of the wind comes out of the sails, and it takes it on the chin. But she's going to continue. Even in 2008, she continues to put away 9,000, 9,000, 22,000, 19,000. Even though it's a total, knock to the plan, she's going to continue moving forward at this point. And even in 2008, by the time she reaches this point, she has almost $300,000 saved, which is pretty impressive. Okay, so if we go down a little bit further and take her to age 67. So at age 67, which if we started today would be 2032, which is not that far into the future. If she continues on this pathway, in 2009, the market return was 20%. In 2010, it was 11%. So in her traditional 401k, she'll have about 80,000. She'll have about 80,000 match. Let's say she has the wind at her back and she's able to stay at this company for 7 years until she retires. In her Roth 401k, she has 196,000, so almost 200,000. And in her brokerage account, she has about 169,000. So altogether, she has about $526,271.56. This is not bad. This is not bad. This is better than most Americans have in their retirement accounts. The average American has about 273,000 in a retirement account. But we also have to consider she's living in the Bay Area. She's single and doesn't have any children. This money really has to last, and it has to last over the next market conditions that come up. So it's an impressive amount, but for her plans to live in the Bay Area, it may be a bit thin. Now, something she told me, and this is something that we required some debate, is she really only expected to live until age 80. No one in her family really lived beyond 80. She did come out on the other side of this disease, but it did take a toll on her health. She was adamant that she wasn't going to live beyond age 80. And I was like, well, what if you do live beyond age 80? So she really wanted me to work the numbers, giving her life until age 80. And then anything beyond that was what she didn't really hear about. She didn't have any children. She didn't have any heirs. Basically, she could die with zero and she would be happy. She required about $7,000 per month to survive with Social Security, and she wanted to stay in the Bay Area. Now, $7,000 a month in the Bay Area is doable, And a lot of her situation, she's lived in the ADU unit of this little old lady, and she actually really likes it. She likes kind of the small housing. We talked about what happens when that situation changes because her roommate or her landlord is quite old. This woman is in her 90s, and when she passes, whoever inherits that house may want her out of that ADU so that they could rent it at full market value. And she's really interested in the tiny house movement. She's willing to move somewhat outside of the Bay Area, but to be adjacent to the Bay Area, like maybe move to Sacramento or Tracy or areas like that. They're just a few hours drive into the Bay Area. So she was willing to maintain that air of flexibility into retirement, which was a very good thing. Remember, her Social Security is at $3,200 a month, and we need to draw $4,000 a month from this portfolio of $526,000 in order to make this work. So, can we make this work until age 80? So the answer is yes. Okay, yes-ish. So God willing, if she passes away at age 80, do I think she'll have $358,000 remaining in her investment accounts? No. Why? Because this is also an emergency account. Things happen. She was driving a beater of a car. I think at some point here, she did replace it with something else, but eventually she's going to have to replace the car. Um, Things happen during the year. She's going to need, a crown put on the tooth. She's going to need maybe even medical care and medical assistance. And this is pretty thin in tomorrow's dollars for medical assistance. I think she can make it to age 80, but it's going to be a very, very narrow fit. It's going to be a very narrow fit indeed. Ideally, I would like to see her with more money here, a little bit more money. But in order to secure that, she would have to work until age 70. And I get it. She narrowly escaped this situation with her health, with her life. She just wasn't willing to give up 3 additional years of her time in the workplace in order to have that additional security. She was ready to go to leave the workplace at age 67, and I kind of understood that. Now, let's see what happens if she lives beyond age 80. So, if she lives beyond age 80, she's probably going to run out of money. Here is 87, but I think she's going to run out of money closer to 86 or 84. So, this portfolio does have the issue of longevity and potentially longevity risk. If she can live with less than $7,000 a month, we talked about the idea of going abroad for a few years and living really cheap and then coming back to the US. That could help this. Or figuring out a way to spend less than $7,000 a month. That can really help this. Maybe spending $5,000 or $6,000. But once you start getting that low, you pretty much have to leave the Bay Area. So there are ways that we can possibly extend this, but the client was actually very happy with living until age 80. Like I said, she was absolutely convinced she was checking out at about 80 and she wasn't going to live much beyond that. Maybe she's right, but the question I always ask, what if you die? Well, what if you live? What if you live? We have to have a plan for that. So in ordinary, if this woman didn't have the background and the story that she had, I would try to encourage her to work until probably 70 and then clock out at 70 and enjoy some years of retirement. But given that she had narrowly escaped this disease with her life, I could totally support leaving the world of work at age 67, buying back that time, and just living a little bit more frugally until the very until the very end, and being satisfied with that response. So there you have it. It is possible to build this if you start at age 60 with absolutely nothing saved from retirement, but you have to have a strong social security, but you have to have good market conditions, but you have to have a very strong salary, and you have to be willing to put a lot of money away. When you don't have time, you have to make up with money, and you have to put away vast sums of money in order to be able to meet the retirement goal. Could most Americans do this? No. Who has $50,000 that they could put away in, retirement savings and stock market? Very few Americans can really put away this amount of money. But in this scenario, it actually worked out quite well, and we were able to get her to the finish line and beyond. So there you have it. Tell me what you think, tell me what you like, and tell me what you don't like. And if you found this information useful, please like, share, and subscribe. Thanks.